Welcome to Front Office Pros. Today, we're going to be ranking the top 10 most important IDP NFL free agents.
Hike!
NFL free agency is right around the corner. And for Dynasty, these are guys that you want to keep a read on because during this time, you're going to see a lot of players, changing different teams and their values are going to change as a result. So we're going to talk about the top 10 guys that Joe and I feel are the most impactful and you want to keep an eye on. Number one, and we're going to be talking about, is defensive end Josh Sweat. Could argue some felt that maybe he was deserving of the player of the game for the Super Bowl with his multiple sacks. A guy who has done good, not great, but just based on how much he wreaked havoc with the Eagles against the Chiefs in the Super Bowl, we're expecting him to have a huge payday, which would then mean that team is going to allow him to just play as the guy there. And with the Eagles giving an extension to Saquon Barkley recently and also signing Zach Bond to make him the fourth highest paid linebacker, odds are Josh Sweat's going to be on the move. Joe, what are your thoughts on Sweat?
Yeah, I mean, he's definitely on the move, and some teams about it to give him a boatload of money. But, from a dynasty standpoint, I mean, it is interesting. He guy who had 8 sacks last year. The most he's had, in his career is 11. So I think he's an interesting defensive end, and depending on where his landing spot goes, he could be an interesting guy as far as dynasty IDP goes.
I just think it's kind of interesting. Maybe he's just a late bloomer, but it's kind of crazy. He's already been in the NFL for 7 years. It just seems like a really, really long time. He is only 27 years old, so it came in, he still got tread in the tires, been kind of more of a rotational player early on, has really turned it on over the past few years. I'll be curious to see if this market isn't as exciting before, but I think you and I are both, edge rushers, especially in our league's format, they mean a ton, and he's the most interesting one as far as future goes. There's some bigger names out there that we'll talk about, but as far as longevity goes, he's got some buzz to his name.
Yeah, for sure. The fact, like you said, he's 27 years old. Some of the other guys we'll talk about are, significantly older. So that makes him interesting. And it'll be interesting, too, to see, depending on where he goes, if he's able to garner a larger opportunity in terms of snap share and a true starter, and how many sacks and what his production will look like.
Are you enjoying this episode so far? Well, if you are, subscribe to our YouTube channel, smash that like button, and hit the notification bell for upcoming videos. We do videos throughout the year, so you're not going to want to miss what we have in store. All right, so heading over to number 2, and that's going to be linebacker Nick Bolton of the Kansas City Chiefs. Has kind of regressed of late, hasn't been able to stay healthy, has been dinged up, in a variety of games. Only 24 years old. Question is, will he be back with Kansas City or not? His best year, obviously, was his second year, had a total of 180 tackles, hasn't sniffed close to that since then. Thoughts on Nick Bolton, Joe?
Yeah, he's interesting. You mentioned the fact that he's, younger linebacker, at 24 years old. I do think he's interesting. He's been shown to be a guy that just gets a lot of tackles for you. Had 106 last year, also had 3 sacks as well. He's that downhill, stuff the run, physical linebacker, doesn't offer much in the pass game, which is a little concerning about, he's not that, probably not going to be a 3-down linebacker, more first and second down. But the opportunity still should be there in terms of the tackle numbers.
Yeah, I think he's benefited from being in that Spagnuolo defense. We'll be really curious to see where he ends up going. But from a linebacker standpoint, from where I can see, most IDP rankers would rank him at least in tier 2, I would think. So it'll be interesting to see, if the Chiefs end up resigning him or will he go elsewhere. For number 3, we're actually going to be talking about another linebacker who had a breakout year this past year, and that's Jamien Sherwood of the New York Jets. You may not know of him. He was not necessarily a household name, a former 5th-round pick out of Auburn. Really, was just a backup for the first 3 years. Really didn't do anything. Really came on the scene, replaced C.J. Mosley which he only played in a few games. But Sherwood, interestingly enough, this past season led the NFL in solo tackles, had a total of 158 tackles. Like I said, had a great year. Reports are indicating that he's going to get a lot of money. Which, if he gets a lot of money, he's at least going to get a runway, I would think, of at least 2, maybe 3 years where he could be a relevant starter. Doesn't mean everything. I mean, we've seen a guy even like a Tremaine Edmonds got a ton of money from the Bears, and he's just gotten worse over time. So doesn't necessarily mean that Sherwood will continue, but definitely interesting as he is young. He's 25 years old, and he's 6'2", 216.
Yeah. Yeah, it is interesting. I mean, I like Jamien Sherwood. I mean, just watching the Jets, he definitely felt his impact. And the fact that you mentioned the fact that he was able to unseat C.J. Mosley at the starter, which is pretty impressive, as Mosley's been a really good linebacker over the years, and he is older. But I like, Sherwood's speed, especially for at his side, sideline to sideline speed is still there. And obviously he got a bunch of tackles as well. So I think he will. It'd be interesting to see where he goes, but I think somebody's going to be willing to pay him a decent amount just because he still is 25 as well.
All right, well, for number 4, we're continuing on that linebacker run. I think this one's going to be a little bit more, I'll put it, tricky. And that's going to be Ernest Jones of the Seattle Seahawks. Ernest Jones has been shopped around a little bit, went to Tennessee, then went to Seattle. Recently, we talked about how he got a knee scope or something of the sort, some sort of surgery. Not the best timing for Ernest Jones, although I'm sure he's trying to get healthy, but not the best timing as far as him being a free agent now and what's going to happen with Ernest Jones. Joe, he's a guy that you've really liked in the past. You kind of are a little concerned about him a little bit more now. What are your thoughts for him?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, I've always really liked Ernest Jones. Took a flyer on him in our, dynasty league in which we have IDP and have really reaped the benefits. But I've just been surprised that he's been bouncing around from team to team so much. He was really successful with the Rams. Kind of, I get, they had guys in the wings that they just would prefer, and they chose to trade him. But then, he went to Tennessee, then over to Seattle. Honestly, it'd be nice if he could go back to the Seahawks because I feel like he really played well. And from a fantasy standpoint, he did a lot better in Seattle than he did Tennessee. Not sure, what their situation looks like or how likely that is. But it's in terms of the knee scope that he had done, I'm not really too nervous about that. It seemed like they were just cleaning up the knee with some issues that he was dealing with the season. So I don't know if that'll affect him that much. And he's still 25 years old. I think somebody should be interested in him.
The tough part is, as outsiders looking in, I'll say, we don't always have the full story.
Yeah.
And linebacker, compared to other position groups, we'll find out very quickly what's the reality and what's fake. And what I say about that is I think Ernest Jones should be relevant, but I will tell you that this might be a situation where we're the outside looking in. I could very well see him having to sign a 1-year prove-it deal. And if he's not able to really make something of himself, you could see Ernest Jones just not being in the league anymore. You see guys like Devin White. You see guys like Shaq Leonard. And honestly, Ernest Jones hasn't even sustained the type of success that those guys had. So he's a guy I'm definitely monitoring. He's younger. Most people really like him. I feel like they rank him quite highly. It's definitely a name to monitor and see how it all shakes out.
I mean, 3 straight years with over 100 tackles is nothing to sneeze at there. And he's also a guy that's got some interceptions in his career, so he can play the pass game as well, unlike a guy like, Nick Bolton, who really doesn't provide that upside for you.
I get that. I think I've been burned, and I think you've been burned on kind of going after linebackers in our free agency.
They're typically older, though, that you get burned. I mean, he's still 25. That's
White and Leonard were young.
I feel like they're older than 25, though.
I'm not so sure about that. And we're going to head over to number 5. And going to get more on the veteran side here. That's going to be defensive end Khalil Mack. I believe is this the first time he's a free agent? I don't know. I believe he was traded to Chicago. I think Chicago then also traded him to the Chargers. I don't think he ever was a free agent and signed. So this could be an opportunity for him. There was, thoughts that he may retire. Now he is on the older side. He's played 11 years in the NFL. He's 34 years old. So we're talking maybe 1 year left. But I'll tell you what. Not necessarily this past season, but the year prior, he had 74 total tackles and 17 sacks. I mean, he went on an absolute tear. So I think he still can be an elite player and give you that immediate impact. Depends on where he goes, right? I mean, to see, what teams end up going for him. It'll be very interesting to see what his market is and what it would be. I think he could easily get either a 1 year deal, which is pretty hefty, or a 2-year deal, which would effectively be a 1 year deal because of the guaranteed money for him.
Yeah, I find it hard that he would get more than a 1 year deal just because he is 34. Not sure how many more years the guy's going to be playing.
Von got a 5-year deal when he was like 32 or 33.
Yeah, I think that's a little bit different, though. I mean, really, outside of the 1 year that you mentioned, like Khalil Mack's just been okay. Before that 17 sack
Well, you've
season,
never been a Khalil Mack fan.
No, I've never been a Khalil Mack fan.
Exactly.
I'm sure
Right.
I'm not going to be a fan of him, in dynasty IDP leagues when he's 34 years old, and I'm not sure where he's going.
He's a name, though. You can't deny that.
Yeah, but I don't buy name factor, man. I focus on production, and he's a guy that does not excite me, and I would not be trying to get him in dynasty leagues.
Well, speaking about production, a guy who hasn't had much, but there's potential. Number 6, Milton Williams, defensive tackle from the Philadelphia Eagles, guy who's been able to prove himself as far as his pass rush skills, but has been in a rotation, hasn't really had a lot of opportunity to, really step up. It seems, again, word on the street from what we're hearing is that he could get a lot of money and he could be going somewhere as a starter. So this could be the opportunity that Milton needed to really take that next step forward. How excited are you about Milton?
Yeah, I'm very excited about Milton Williams. I think he's got a lot of upside. It takes a little bit for defensive tackles to, come alive. It takes at least 3 years. He's been in the league for 4 years now, but it's just hard to come by with a guy like, with his sack upside that he's been able to show in the 2 out of the 4 at least. There was this past year he had 5, and then 2022 he had 4 sacks. Even 2021, his rookie year, he had 2. And if he's going to get more playing time, being able to be a starter, I think that only helps him.
My only hope with him is I hope he doesn't go to just like a desolate place that has nothing. Like let's say he goes to like the Falcons and Grady Jarrett's no longer there and it's just him. He's the guy. I don't know if he can succeed. I think he showed flashes because of the supporting cast surrounding him. I don't want him to be the guy. I want him to have at least 1, maybe 2 accent guys who can really help him so he's not being keyed in on.
Yeah, I mean, ultimately it'd be nice if he could go, to some, like to your point, somewhere that's got a guy that's more of a run stuffing defensive tackle and doesn't provide the sack upside where that guy could take on some double teams and more so free him up in the interior.
And honestly, I could see him going to Arizona, reuniting with Jonathan Gannon, but I don't know if I'd even really want that because how much was he really used? They need help. Their pass rush is really bad, and I can't really even name a guy who Jevon Holland, I guess, is interesting, but Gardeck has shown some flashes in the past, but that could be probably one of the more likely spots he goes, and I would not like that for him.
Yeah, I mean, we'll see what happens. But I mean, even a guy like, for in terms of the Cardinals, a guy like Roy Lopez has even had his moments over there. So maybe Williamson could do something there.
Talking about another player who kind of had a resurgence here, and that's number 7, Jeremy Chinn, safety of the Washington Commanders, a guy who fell out of favor in Carolina. I think you and I had talked about in the past, we were expecting him to take the next step or go back to more of a consistency with Evero coming in as a defensive coordinator for the Panthers. just never really jived in that system, decided to sign a prove-it deal, went with the Commanders. And I know I was very concerned. You weren't as much with Frankie Louvu and Bobby Wagner being there. It's like, okay, only so many of them can have tackles. But Jeremy Chinn definitely proved me wrong. I think he's going to be looking for a payday. I would think. I mean, Washington has a ton of money. I know they don't have as much as more with a trade with Debo. But if I were him, I'd recommend going back. And from his dynasty value, I hope he does. If he goes somewhere else, I guess so, depending on the fit. But we saw what happened when he's in the wrong system.
Yeah, I agree 100% with you. I mean, he was a guy that I was excited about going to the Commanders. Had a really good year. Had 107 tackles. Was able to get a couple of sacks. Had an interception. You mentioned it for his dynasty's sake. I really hope he does go back to the Commanders and continue to build off of the one season that he had thus far.
Heading over number 8, we're going to be talking about another safety, and that's going to be safety Jevon Holland of the Miami Dolphins. I think he's good as gone from the Dolphins. Everything that I could tell and what he said, it doesn't seem like there's any desire for him to go back. He's probably one of the bigger names. The problem is he's kind of a deeper safety. So if he doesn't get those pass deflections and interceptions, he's no good for you from an IDP standpoint. Sounds like he could get a lot of money. From what I saw in a video of his, he says he wants to be in a really competitive place. But then I heard recently from a reporter from Miami talking about that Carolina is definitely in play. And I'm like, if you want to be a winner, I don't really think Carolina is the place these days. So I don't know. I think he's a name. It doesn't mean that he can't. I mean, you've got a guy like Jesse Bates, right? I mean, he's more of a ball hawking type safety. So it doesn't mean that Holland can't be a break into one of the top safety roles. But I don't think he'll be back in Miami. That's for sure.
Yeah, no, he's definitely not going to be back with the Dolphins. We'll see where he ends up. But yeah, to your points. I mean, the main difference is thus far, like a guy like Jesse Bates will get you those multiple interceptions and pass deflections and really be there. I mean, Holland really hasn't shown that ability. He does have. I mean, he's got 5 interceptions on his career. Had none last year in 15 games. But yeah, in terms of the safety production for Dynasty, he doesn't really get you that many tackles. And if he doesn't get those big plays, then you're going to be massively disappointed.
At number 9, we've got a guy who technically isn't a free agent at the time of this recording, but I think we both would agree and believe that maybe by the time this is released to the masses here, that he will be a free agent, and that's going to be defensive tackle Jonathan Allen. We've already heard recently that if the team can't find a trade partner, they've basically come out and said they will release him. To me, that's like the kiss of death. Like, you might as well release him at that point. What kind of leveraging power do you truly have? If I know you're going to release him, why am I going to give you any picks? It doesn't make any sense. So I think he's going to be a free agent. Now, obviously he was injured last year. Never been a huge sack total guy. Most he's ever gotten was 9 sacks. But I think he still has game left in him. He's 30 years old. Defensive tackles can play later in their career. I'd be kind of curious about this one and where he ends up going.
Yeah, I'm very interested to see where he ends up going. Kind of similar to, Milton Williams, if he's able to go to a spot that's got some other good pass rushers or more stable guys in the interior defensive line as well. He could really flourish, and he has that sack upside. He's had overall 42 sacks over the course of his year. I mean, he had 3 in 8 games last year, so who knows how many he would have ended up getting, if he would have played the full season. So that sack upside alone at the defensive tackle position is hard to beat. So it makes him interesting. I'll definitely be keeping an eye on him.
Yeah, he's a name, and he has been one of the better defensive tackles, I think, from a football standpoint for a while. Maybe an IDP hasn't been as good. So definitely a guy I'm interested in monitoring to see where he goes. But last but not least, at number 10, we've got a guy who created a lot of drama this past season, and that's going to be defensive end Haason Reddick. Now, Reddick's value kind of went down the tubes after all the debacle with the New York Jets and holding out. And, anytime you do that, you don't have training camp, you don't get into football shape. I think you and I both are kind of a believer in that, to kind of get involved in the off season ahead of time. Now, I think if Reddick would have played the whole season and had he more characteristic of what he did, I think his interest around the league would be a lot higher. I'm curious to see what his market will be, but we got to remember he's 30 years old. So, edge rushers can play quite a long time. And before the season, he had 11 sacks, 16 sacks, 11 sacks, and 12 and a half sacks. And you got to remember, that's 1 year in Arizona, 1 year in Carolina, and 2 in Philly. So I think that he's a very intriguing player, depending on where he goes.
Yeah, he is intriguing, but I think the landing spot it means a lot for him, and we'll see where he goes. I think if he's just the guy, I'll be worried. But if he can go on a team that's got a good pass rusher on the opposite side of him that take a little pressure off of him, and both of them can eat, I'll be very excited for him. And yeah, I think him getting to a team in free agency here, going through the full offseason, will only help him. You mentioned I don't like seeing guys not participate in training camp and things like that. Generally leads to injuries and you not being able to play the full season. So I'm interested. He's a guy that I'll have my eye on here.
Yeah, I think one of the reasons why, somebody may be asking, well, why on earth do you have Khalil Mack ahead of Haason Reddick from a dynasty perspective? I think that when it comes down to it, Reddick has to remake his image. Khalil Mack doesn't. And more than likely Reddick can, but it's an if. It's not a guarantee based on what happened with him in the New York Jets.
Yeah, and honestly, his two best years were with the Philadelphia Eagles, and they're just loaded amongst the defensive line as well. So he really benefited from that. So can he do it on a team that's absolutely not stacked along the defensive front? And that's to be determined. And I think that kind of justifies where you do got him right there.
All right, so that's our top 10 most important NFL free agents who are IDP. And you have to think about them for your dynasty leagues, as their values could be changing here in less than a week. Or about a week probably. We'll start hearing that news trickle in, Monday, Tuesday. So these guys may start to sign, usually those days are just an absolute frenzy.
Yeah, for sure. I think it's going to start right when that tampering period opens on Monday. I think it's going to be fast and furious.
Ding, ding, ding. So that does it for this episode. Thank you so much for tuning in, and until next time.